In the last years of my mother's life, she shared something with me I'll never forget. She lived out in the country in San Anselmo. She had a ranch-style home and a lot of acreage, and she raised llamas and Shetland sheepdogs. My grandmother lived there with her. One night, they were out sitting on the porch, gazing at the stars, when they noticed something strange. She told me as they sat watching the skies, she saw this shadow moving against the stars, blocking them, and it was moving towards her. She called my grandmother's attention to it, and she saw it too. It was getting closer and larger still. And then the unexpected happened. Lights started moving from within inside the object at its center. Lights that started to come towards them. My mother and grandmother were unnerved by this action, but they stood up and watched it with fascination. As the light centered on them, they became nervous and moved into the house. As I talked to my mom on the phone, and she described this event to me, I asked her, "So what happened next?" There was a long delay in her response, a silence, and I said, "Mom, what happened next?" She said, "You know, I don't remember. I really don't remember." When I was 15, I lived in a small town called Pacifica. It was a town by the ocean, a beach town. It was lovely there. We lived in a house up the hill, and we lived under this hill that towered above us. I had a friend that lived across the street. We both had an interest in UFOs. I read a lot of books about it. I was seeing them often. I was telling him about them. And we'd go up on top of his roof and look for them. Sometimes we'd see them, sometimes we wouldn't. But on one night, he was having a sleepover at our house. My mom was asleep in her room across from my bedroom. Mike was sleeping on the floor, and I was sleeping in the bed. But somehow I found myself standing on the porch, the back porch to our house, and I was looking up at the hill where there was a Nike base. Now I knew there was a Nike base there because we had all hiked up to the top of the hill many, many times and played in the World War II bunkers there, and they were amazing. They went very deep underground, like 2-3 stories. We could get into them. They had them chained off, but we had a way to get in through the air vents, and we would explore these things, and it was just amazing. Not only that, but when I first came to the town, I was in 5th and 6th grade, and during the Bay of Pigs, we were standing at recess and looking up at the hill, and we saw all these missiles standing up, towering above the hill, as though they were getting ready to launch them. I'll never forget it. But on this night, I'm just there, and I'm looking up at the hill, and there's this light, and I'm wondering, well, there's no road up there. Maybe it's just somebody on patrol with flashlights. It can't be a car. There'd be 2 headlights. There'd be 2 lights, and it was this amber color. And it wasn't very bright, and it was getting a little larger. I was so excited. I ran in the house, and I tried to get Mike to wake up, and he wouldn't. I literally dragged him by his arm outside. I said, "Look, there's a UFO, Mike. Look, it's up by the Nike base, look." He looked at it reluctantly and said, "Okay, all right, okay, great." And then he just kept going away. I kept pulling him back, but he wouldn't stay. And he went back into the house. It was just really odd. So I stood there and I watched it for quite some time. And as it got a little bigger and came down the hillside more, which was a very steep incline that was just grass covered. Wild wheat, you know, that kind of tall grass. There's no way a car could be there. I could see that it was hat-shaped, lenticular with a dome. And it was that soft, pale amber light, like it was trying not to be seen. About this time, my mom started yelling. I could hear her saying, "What are you doing? Go back to bed." And I told her, I saw a UFO. There's a UFO outside. And she got really angry and said, "There's no UFOs. Go back to bed. I got to get up early tomorrow and go to work." And she did. She was hardworking, and she had a long drive every morning to San Francisco from Pacifica. So I went back to bed. I just don't remember anything more about it. Except the next morning, I'm sitting at the breakfast table in the kitchen, and she comes in, and she looks at me, and she's got a newspaper. She says, "You know that UFO you saw last night? It's in the paper." She tossed it down on the table in front of me and walked off. She never said anything about it again. Looking back at it all, it's amazing that the missile base was there. It seems to me, in my memory, that almost every place I lived, from San Francisco to Pacifica to San Anselmo, California, at my grandmother's house, there was some kind of military base. But in this instance, there was a missile base. And you can see here where it was located from the air using Google Maps. And I zoomed in, and you could see the big metal plates that were the hatches that covered over where the Nike missiles were stored. These would open and missiles would come up, and that's what we could see from the schoolyard and down below. It's no wonder that the UFO took an interest in the missile site, especially being so close to my home. It was the late 1960s, and I would go to bed early, as I was instructed to do by my mom, but she'd stay up later, and she'd play piano before she went to sleep. And she played classical music, beautiful classical music. She played everything from Beethoven to Rachmaninoff to Debussy, and it was very comforting. I loved it. It was a wonderful way to go to sleep. Recently, Mary put a YouTube station on that was playing classical piano music, and I was washing the dishes, and suddenly this piece of music started playing, and I started getting emotional. I teared up. I had this memory. It was so strong, it just came storming into my mind, and I could remember laying in bed and my mom playing piano, and I was scared to death. Why? Because there was a blue light coming in through my window, and I wanted to move, and I could barely move, and I wanted to scream out for my mom and say, "Mom, help me," and I couldn't do it. It's like I knew what was happening, because this happened many, many more times in my life during that period that I was in school. As far as I would get would be going to the window, floating over the backyard, and going up into the sky. And as I floated up, I saw this dark circle in the sky and the lights and the beam on me. And that was it. But this seemed to happen over and over again. The more I thought about it, the more I remembered that this was going on. As I floated up, I could just hear my mom still playing, and it was just fading away. I felt so helpless. After these nights, it was always hard to go to school the next day. I felt drugged. I couldn't tell anybody what was going on. I didn't know what was going on. I certainly couldn't tell my mother, and sometimes it was so bad, I would claim I was sick and she'd let me stay home. My recollection was, looking back, that this was a very conscious experience, but I wasn't allowed to remember anything beyond that. Over time, I had these dreams, and the dreams, I believe, were conscious memories I had buried in my subconscious that came forward. And I would remember being on the table with the beings standing around. They were doing tests. They were poking and prodding me. They were talking to me. I remember walking down the corridors. I remember looking out windows. I remember being shown space. All these things that I would later recall under hypnosis with Yvonne were happening back then too. But I never connected the dots. Here I was seeing UFOs. I was seeing UFOs with friends. I was seeing UFOs regularly, up close and personal sometimes. And I was having these dreams. But it was too soon, and I wasn't connecting it all together. And I wouldn't connect it all together till much later on during the 80s, and we know why that happened. But there was one dream that I had that happened over and over again. And it changed each time, but it was always the same setting. Somehow, I would drift into this white limbo. It felt like it was a fog, a white fog, and as I came forward through it, I saw what looked like a tent, and on the floor was pillows, something that looked like pillows, and some kind of white comforter. All was in white, and standing inside was this beautiful woman. with long silver hair and this beautiful face. And there was something odd about her, but she looked very, very human. She took me into her arms and she caressed me. She held me close. She told me how important I was. She told me that I was important to her. You've heard this before. And this just kept happening, and I was falling in love with her. I mean, I was an adolescent, teenager, in puberty, and I loved her so much. And then I'd wake up, and I'd feel this loss. And I was confused because this dream was so real. But it was time to go to school. My mom would come in and kick my bed. Time to go to school. I'd get up, I'd go to school, and all day long I'd feel this haunting. Then it would happen again, and again, and again. And this happened over a number of years, but it started to become less and less towards the end of high school. And then one time when I was having the dream and I was with her, she suddenly wasn't that woman anymore. She was the tall white being that I've known all these years. It was very feminine, and it took a great deal of interest in me, and she was looking me right in the eyes, as though to say farewell. But it wasn't farewell, and we know that, because she did come back, and she keeps coming back, and I guess she always will. Maybe even when I pass from this world, she'll be there waiting for me. But I remember the dreams well. And the feeling I got is that she was tapping into me. She was tapping into my emotional being. She was experiencing and sensing my emotions and my feelings of love. She was living through me vicariously somehow. It was like an attachment. It's like she couldn't get enough of it. Maybe it was all just a fantasy. Maybe it was just all a dream. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe I just made it up. But in my heart, I know that's not true. The amazing thing about it all is in her connecting with me and experiencing my emotional being. This was all happening between a very advanced being, very evolved, and one not so advanced. Or was I? As I said earlier in this program, my mom and I never saw eye to eye. We never got along well at all. There was always this thing between us. I suspect that she had some secret she wasn't sharing with me, and there was something to this phenomenon that was happening to me that was keeping us with this distance between us. We had a complicated relationship, to say the least. And we didn't talk for years after I moved out of the house and came to Los Angeles to seek my career in Hollywood. Once in a while we talked, but we went for a very long period of time where we never talked at all. One day I called her up and we started talking again. We enjoyed our conversation. We became friends. Still, there was that distance. Then she brought something up to me. She says, you know, in the 90s, all those TV shows you were on about UFOs, I saw those. And in this tone in her voice, I thought, I'm done. And I sort of panicked and I said, Mom, now, come on. And she interrupted me and said, no, no. And her voice went soft and she said, I believe you. I know. I didn't know exactly what she meant by I know. But then she started to share her experiences with me. She didn't share a lot of them, just a few kind of amazing ones, like the one about her and my grandmother sitting on the porch that night. That story she told me blew my mind, because up to that point, I had always held out skepticism about my own experience. I never accepted face value that this might be absolutely real. I had this doubt, and I thought that it was actually helping me to have it, and I think it was. But any chance I had at that moment of still having that doubt or a better explanation for what happened to me went straight out the window when my mother told me that story. At that moment, I knew it was real. Either that or we were both crazy, or the whole family, because that was my mother's secret.